The Roman Republic did not collapse suddenly, and it did not collapse accidentally. It collapsed because its political system failed to enforce its own limits on power. For centuries, Rome had relied on a system of shared authority, short-term offices, and legal constraints designed to prevent any one individual from dominating the state. That system depended on one assumption: that those limits would be respected and enforced. By the 1st century BCE, that assumption was no longer true. This documentary explains how Julius Caesar rose within that failing system, how he exploited its weaknesses, and why removing him did not restore the Republic. This is not a story about destiny or ambition alone. It is a story about what happens when laws exist on paper but cannot be enforced in reality. Julius Caesar was born in 100 BCE into a Roman aristocratic family. His family name was ancient, but his branch of it was not wealthy or politically dominant. What shaped Caesar most was not privilege, but instability. During his youth, Rome experienced open civil violence under the general Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla marched an army on Rome, seized control, and ruled as dictator. This violated a fundamental Roman norm. Armies were not supposed to enter the city, and generals were not supposed to rule it. Sulla introduced proscriptions, official lists of political enemies. Being listed meant legal execution and confiscation of property. There was no trial. Caesar was connected by marriage to Sulla's opponents. Sulla ordered him to divorce his wife. Caesar refused. As a result, Caesar lost his inheritance and was forced to flee Rome. For years, he lived as a fugitive, surviving through bribery and personal connections. This taught Caesar two concrete lessons. Roman law did not protect individuals when political power shifted, and violence, once accepted as political tool, could override legality. When Sulla later resigned, he set another precedent. Dictatorship was no longer unthinkable. Caesar returned to a republic that had already proven it could suspend its own rules. To understand Caesar's rise, it is necessary to understand how Rome's system was designed to function. At the top of the republic were two consuls, elected annually. Each consul had veto power over the other. This was meant to prevent unilateral rule. Other offices were similarly limited by short terms, shared power, and legal accountability after office. The Senate advised, but did not formally govern. Laws were passed through popular assemblies. Crucially, no office was permanent, and no individual commanded the state long-term. This system worked when Rome was small. It began to fail when Rome became an empire. By the 1st century BCE, Rome ruled vast territories, but its political structure had not adapted. Several structural failures emerged. The first was wealth concentration. Conquests enriched elites while displacing small landowners. This created mass poverty and unrest. Another failure was blocked reform. Senators routinely blocked land and debt reforms that threatened elite interests, even when instability increased. Political violence saw armed gangs disrupted elections. Riots became common. Reformers were murdered with little consequence. Professional armies were established. Soldiers now served long terms and relied on generals for pay and retirement land. Loyalty shifted from the state to individuals. The Republic still existed legally, but it could no longer resolve conflict without force. That is the environment Caesar entered. Caesar pursued popularity deliberately. Roman elections were not anonymous and were heavily influenced by public favor. Caesar spent enormous sums on games, festivals, and public projects. This placed him deeply in debt, but debt created urgency. To survive politically, Caesar needed high office, military command, and long-term relevance. Military success was the only reliable path. In 58 BCE, Caesar received command over provinces in Gaul. This command gave him legal authority to wage war, control over legions, and access to plunder and land grants. Over nearly a decade, Caesar conducted continuous campaigns. Mechanically, this mattered. Because war generated wealth Caesar could distribute personally, soldiers became dependent on Caesar for rewards, and veterans expected land from him, not the Senate. At the same time, Caesar wrote and published accounts of the wars, shaping public perception in Rome. The Senate could not remove him without risking unrest or violence. By the end of his command, Caesar possessed an experienced personal army, enormous financial resources, popular legitimacy, independent of the Senate. This combination had already destroyed the Republic once before under Sulla. Roman law forbade any general from entering Italy with an army. This rule existed because military power inside the city had historically led to tyranny. In 49 BCE, the Senate ordered Caesar to relinquish his command and return to Rome alone. Mechanically, this would strip him of legal immunity, expose him to prosecution by political enemies, and remove his ability to defend himself politically or militarily. Caesar faced a choice. Either he obey the law and lose power, or break the law and challenge the system. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, he violated a foundational rule of the Republic. The response revealed the system's weakness. The Senate could issue orders, but could not enforce them. Pompey, the Senate's military champion, fled Rome. Cities surrendered without resistance. Authority shifted not because of legality, but because enforcement followed force. Once the Civil War began, its structure favored Caesar. He controlled veteran legions loyal to him personally. He controlled Italian territory and tax revenue. His enemies relied on senatorial legitimacy without enforcement. Each victory further weakened the Republic's claim to authority. The war ended not with compromise, but with Caesar as the sole remaining power broker. After victory, Caesar accumulated offices that had once been temporary safeguards. Consulship, normally annual and shared. Caesar held it repeatedly, sometimes without proper elections. Dictatorship, originally a 6-month emergency office. Caesar was appointed dictator multiple times, then granted the title for life. Each step followed a legal mechanism, but violated the spirit of the system by removing limits. The Republic's safeguards depended on restraint. Caesar proved they could be bypassed legally once norms collapsed. Senators assassinated Caesar believing that removing the individual would restore the system. But the system no longer functioned. The Senate had no army, no enforcement power, no public trust. Caesar's death created a vacuum, not restoration. Civil war resumed immediately. Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, learned from Caesar's mistakes. Instead of abolishing republican titles, he controlled the army, the treasury, the courts, while preserving republican language. Rome accepted this because stability mattered more than constitutional form. The Republic ended not when Caesar seized power, but when no institution could restrain those who did. Julius Caesar did not destroy the Roman Republic. He demonstrated that its laws could no longer limit power. And once that was proven, the Republic could not survive. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to Empires Uncovered. where we dive into empirical history daily, and leave a comment if you have an idea for a future video. Thank you, and have a great day.